Welcome to the breakout session using appreciative inquiry to promote system change in parent leadership and advocacy, led by Dr. Ebonyse Mead. We are so glad you are here. My name is Donna, and I'll be moderating today's session. I will be monitoring questions in the chat, and if you have any issues, you can send me a direct message through the Zoom chat. We ask that everyone stays on mute during the session unless you have a question or to participate in the conversation. This helps reduce background noise. We encourage you to be on video if you can, so we can see each other and build community. But if you are more comfortable or must be off video for children and other reasons, we understand. If you'd like to read the transcript to see the closed caption for this session, please click on the button that says CC Live Transcript, then choose Show Subtitle. You can hide the subtitles by repeating this process. Please share your thoughts, questions, affirmations, or anything that is particularly interesting to you in this process. Now to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ebonyse Mead is a clinical instructor at Georgia Southern University and president of the Educational Equity Institute. For 19 years, she has worked in communities to improve the health and education outcomes for children of diverse culture and socioeconomic backgrounds. Dr. Mead is an educator, writer, presenter, and trainer with a focus on examining structural barriers to educational equity and culturally responsive instruction for the early childhood workforce. She is the co-author of Building Equitable Early Learning Programs, a social justice approach, which will be published in spring 2023. Now I will turn it over to our presenter to start the session. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Donna, for the introduction. And so welcome. I see we have maybe another person joining us today. So since we have such a small group, we will not make this formal at all. This will be, more like of a conversation. So I've shared my screen. Today, we're going to talk about using an appreciative inquiry approach to promote systems change in parent leadership and advocacy. And really, when I talk about systems change, I'm thinking about changing, the inequities that are embedded within the early childhood system. And so we are going to get started. I was instructed to share this particular slide for interpretation. And so I am sharing this slide for anyone that needs it that's on the Zoom call this morning. This is the second piece of that particular slide that, again, I was instructed to share. So I'm going to start with an icebreaker. And Donna, feel free to, participate if you like as well. And so I just like to start with the icebreaker because, as Donna mentioned, like we're in community together, like even though, we're not in the same location, but we are in this learning space together. So with that said, just tell us in the chat, what is your favorite dessert? And I will participate as well. Okay, cheesecake. Mine is any kind of like donuts, pound cake. Donna says pound cake. Leila says cheesecake or ice cream. I like donuts or cake. All right, so thank you. Hopefully we have, again, more individuals to join us later on, but we're going to get started. And so our objectives for today is to define a system, right? And when we're thinking about a system, we're thinking about both the macro level of the system and the micro level of a system. And I'll talk about what those are, particularly when we're looking at early childhood. And then we're going to describe the key components of systems level change. So what do we need, as parent leaders and advocates to change, the inequities that are embedded within the early childhood system. And then lastly, we will take a look at the Appreciative Inquiry Framework and how we can use that to promote, how parents can use that to promote parent leadership and advocacy. So I have a quick interactive activity for you all to do. And again, Donna, you're welcome to participate. When you hear the term advocacy, what words come to mind? So what you have to do, you have to go to this website right here, mentimeter.com, and then type in the code 64675221. And I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. All right. So we have flexibility, strengths, collaboration, mentor. I'm not sure what ADA means. Maybe the person didn't have a chance to finish typing, but we have advocating, strong, responsibility, flexibility, leadership, servant, strength again, grace, action, resourceful, advocate, inspiration, collaborator, patience, collective, teachable. I think, did I say mentor? I think I said mentor. Okay. All right. So for those that just came on, we did one previously where we um did a word cloud like this for the term advocate. And so, oh, I'm sorry, advocacy. And so if you want to type that in the chat, what thoughts or words come to mind when you think of the word advocacy, you can do that as well for those that just recently joined us. All right, so I like to do this activity just so we can get, just some kind of like a baseline, right? When we talk about advocacy and leadership, it's really important that we have a shared understanding of what we talk about, so we actually know, how we can better promote, equity within the early childhood system in terms of, providing leadership and being advocates for our children, as well as our educators. So I'm going to stop sharing this and then go back. Melinda wants to put the code in the chat. Okay, hold on, Melinda.
Donna did. Thank you, though.
Okay. You're welcome. All right, so I'm going to share my screen to go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so we just finished this one about leadership. And so some of you, I don't know why it moves on its own like that. Some of you have probably heard of the relationship-based competencies for family engagement. These 10 competencies were developed by the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. And I actually use these in my class with my students in my child development course and the courses that I teach in parenting education, as well as family engagement, just because I think they provide, really good guidance to understand the ways in which we can support parents in being engaged, in the early childhood system. And so these RBCs, relationship-based competencies, they describe the skills, the knowledge, and individual practices that early childhood professionals can use to engage families, in a positive way and to build, authentic relationships. And so we're going to look at a few because I think the first three really set the tone for helping to create the space for parents to be advocates and leaders, in the early childhood system. Okay, so the first one is positive goal-oriented relationships, right? And so when we're thinking about in any kind of work that we do with anyone, right, whether it's, supporting families or having, parents be, or caregivers be a part of the work that we do in a very intentional way, or when we're working with teachers, whatever the case may be, right? We start with this positive relationship and this mutual respect, and trust that we have to build, because we know that when we do that, again, in a meaningful way, that it sets the tone to have positive outcomes for both children and families, right? And so it's important that we understand, working together in a collaborative space. And in order to do that, we have to be able to share planning and decision-making power with parents and caregivers. And so we also have to create space, right, for parents and caregivers to step into roles of, engagement and leadership and advocacy. So we have to create spaces that are comfortable, that they are safe, that parents feel respected and they feel like, their voices matter, and that we show respect for a family's culture, for their values, and for their life situations and circumstances. And then the next one is being self-aware and providing culturally responsive relationships, right? And so again, we have to take inventory of the unique strengths that families have and the ways in which they are resilient, their ways of being and their ways of knowing, their cultural languages, their values, and the various ways that families are structured, right? Because we know there's like no one way a family should look. And then that helps us to engage in relationships that are responsive, that are built on, mutual trust and respect, and that value, various cultures and languages, and things of that nature. And so then when we can have positive, goal-oriented relationships, and we're self-aware and we're creating those culturally responsive relationships, then we can create space for again, parents and caregivers to step into leadership and advocacy roles. And so this is when we are working alongside parents and caregivers to build on their strengths as advocates and leaders, not just in their families, but in programs and also in communities, right? And so we're working with families to plan ways to advocate for their children, ways to advocate for services, and just to advocate for the early childhood system overall. We are being intentional about including families in decision-making and planning and processing and decisions, and having them, be at that program level where they are making, intentional decisions about, children's outcomes and things of that nature. And then it's just, encouraging parents and caregivers to engage, with one another to, advocate for policy change and advance policy change, in the program as well as in the communities in which they live. But we know that there are some barriers that may prevent families from being engaged, from having them take on leadership and advocacy roles. So if you can take a moment and type in the chat, what do you think are some barriers that may prevent families from being engaged and stepping into those advocacy and leadership roles? Okay, Layla says schedule capacity, culture, language barriers, language, education, confidence, lack of knowledge, transportation, lack of confidence, transportation, all of these things. Transportation again. Language and time, yes. Okay, so let's look at some, because I listed some as well. One parent households, time constraints due to work and transportation. Yes, Natasha. Okay, so here are a few, and you all listed them: transportation, time, childcare. I indicated relevance of importance. Sometimes families might not be engaged if they don't think, what's happening is important to their lives, to their children's, right? It also could be a barrier if they've had their own negative school experiences, being in places where they don't feel welcome or they feel judged, not valued or respected, and cultural mistrust and implicit biases. And so we're going to talk about the last two just really quickly. So this term cultural mistrust, it was used in a book called Black Rage. And what it is, it's an adaptive attitudinal response to historical and personal oppression in which people of color are skeptical of trusting not all, but maybe some whites in institutional, personal, and social context, especially when they are in positions of power and authority, right? And it's adaptive because it's a coping mechanism for people of color to kind of navigate the ways in which we experience, racism and discrimination and biases and all of those type of things. And so sometimes when you're in, different, aspects of our institutions, particularly like education or maybe the healthcare system, and there's people that are positions of power that don't look like you. They may not take your word on things that you say, or may treat you differently because, of your racial or ethnic background or the language that you speak, all of those things. And so there's this cultural mistrust that's kind of, that kind of arises that may prevent, families, particularly families, of color, or marginalized identities, for being intentionally involved in, the education process or the healthcare for their children and things of that nature. And so the other way that parents can, or families can be prevented from being engaged is like implicit biases, right? We all have implicit biases. It's so important that we do the work to learn what our implicit biases are, and that's just it, right? They implicit, they're unconscious. And so it's important to know that we all have them. They are pervasive and robust. They activate involuntarily. So we don't, sometimes they don't align with our declared values and beliefs. They develop early in life through socialization. So the ways in which that we were raised and brought up, we've been socialized to internalize different messages and ideologies about different groups of people. And often the media reinforces those stereotypes, that influences our perceptions and beliefs about other people. But the good thing is that our implicit biases are malleable, and we can learn to unlearn the ways in which we've been socialized to think negatively about people and then replace those with positive mental associations. So, when we're thinking about creating space for parents and caregivers and families to take on, leadership roles and be advocates, we have to think about the ways cultural mistrust may show up, in the environment, or the ways implicit biases may prevent, full engagement. So what we have to do, again, is we have to work collectively. We have to work collectively to promote a better and more equitable early childhood systems. And we can do that, in several ways. And one way is to truly understand what a system is, right? And so when we're thinking about the system, this definition that I like to use is that it's a group of interacting organizations or programs that influence how services are provided, right? So when we're thinking about, I'm just going to go to this slide. When we're thinking about a system, we think about it in terms of a macro system and then a micro system. And so the macro system is like, the cultural norms, the values, the customs, right? So in early childhood, we can think of NACI as a macro system, right? That particular system influences the micro systems. So the micro systems in early childhood, like universal pre-K, Head Start, Smart Start, all of those type of things, right? And so the overall ideology, so if we're thinking about NACI provides, guidance in terms of teachers and professional development and, developmentally appropriate practices, all of those things. So that overall ideology drives the direct services that children and families receive. But it's also important that we take inventory of the microsystems because each microsystem operates in silos, right? And so the microsystem may be influenced by the macrosystem, but they also have their own issues and concerns, right? So, but none of them operate within isolation, simply because they are influenced by, the prevailing ideologies of the macro system. And so when we're thinking about systems level change and how do we change systems, we have to focus on addressing the root cause of social problems. A lot of times what we do, we put what I like to call Band-Aids on situations. And so we address the symptoms and not necessarily addressing the root causes. So let's look at suspensions and expulsions of young children. We know that there's data to show that children of color, particularly Black boys, are suspended at higher rates, right? And so if we're thinking about, what's the root cause of that, it could be things like, something that's going on in the family. Implicit biases could be at play. But a lot of times what we do is we put interventions in place that address the symptoms, right? So we're addressing this quote unquote challenging behavior as opposed to addressing the root causes of the disproportionate rate that Black children are suspended and expelled from preschool learning environments. And so when we're thinking about systems level change, it has to be an intentional process. It has to be a process that is designed to alter the components of the current system, right? And the structures that are in place that perpetuate those inequities. We have to be able to shift the circumstances. So again, that means we have to look at what things are in place, what policies are in place, procedures and practices that are in place that are perpetuating and maintaining these inequities. And then we have to alter the power dynamics that keep those inequities in place. And that's why parent and caregiver, engagement and leadership and advocacy is so important, because that is one way that we can alter the power dynamics. And so if we're thinking about a root cause analysis, these are just, some basic steps to, really digging deeper in the root cause analysis. So one, we have to define what the problem is. We have to gather all of the information and the data around that particular problem. And I'm going to show you an example in the next slide. Then we have to identify any issues that are continuing to contribute to that problem that helps us determine what the root cause is. We have to identify recommendations for the recurrence of the problem in the future, and then implement necessary solutions. And so, if we think about some of the inequities that exist within education, these are some questions. This is the question we can ask ourselves, like, what might be the root cause for this particular disparity in education? So if we're looking at, suspensions and expulsion, the question will be, what will be the root cause of that? If we're looking at the ways in which children are, disproportionately represented in special education, that the question is, what will be the root cause of that? And so here's an example of a root cause analysis, right? We want to, again, define the problem. So we're looking at disproportionality in suspensions and expulsion as an example. And so we want to define the problem. So we've defined the problem here, right? Then we want to look at the data. Well, we know that there's data that suggests, well, not suggest, but report that Black children represent 18% of the preschool population, but they represent 48% of suspensions and expulsions, right? Then we have to drill down a little bit and disaggregate the data. So what about ethnicity? What about gender? What about disability? Because we also know that children that have varying abilities are also suspended at disproportionate rates as well. Then we have to, again, identify what's contributing to this problem. So is it things like lack of professional development and culturally responsive anti-bias practices and anti-racist education? Is it insufficient policies and insufficient funding? And then what could be some of the root problems? Is it just implicit biases? Is it anti-Blackness? Is it colorism? Is it, this idea that whiteness is the norm within education? So again, this is just an example of how we can, drill down deeper to do a root cause analysis to see what the issues are and how we can promote, system change within education. But here's some barriers that I just wanted to share with you all to systems change. Some people are very entrenched in the status quo, saying things like, this is the way we've always done it, and not being open to, other ideas, or not being able to share power and control, with families and parents and caregivers. There's some organizations that are highly self-interested. They're interested in their communities, system, leaders. We've been doing this work, like, we're the keepers of the work. And then, funding, within organizations also could be a barrier, particularly if funding is limited. Silo systems and services, so that, lacking the ability to pull resources together and work collaboratively. And then this check the box mentality. Well, we've done this, and so we're just going to check the box, and we're not going to, revisit, whatever you're doing until the next year again, right? And so again, just being entrenched in the status quo. This is the way we've done things. It's always worked this way, not being open to change. And so the other way that we can promote, parent advocacy and parent leadership is like really being intentional about focusing on these family-centered care principles. And so the goal of this, again, is like creating, relationships with families in order to build that mutual respect and that partnership, so families can step into this space more easily to be leaders and advocates. And so there's 5. Is recognize and respect one another's knowledge and experience. We know that families are highly knowledgeable. They come to, to childcare centers with their funds of knowledge and ways of being. So does teachers, right? And so it's being able to respect, the knowledge that each other have. Having this two-way communication and share that communication in a thoughtful way. Again, being able to share power and decision-making. Acknowledging and respecting the ways in which we are diverse in so many different ways, and then just creating networks of support, being intentional about that. And so when we're thinking about, recognizing and respecting one another's knowledge and experience, like I said, we know that families, come to this work, and early childhood professionals come to this work, and they both bring unique experiences and expertise to the partnership, right? And so recognizing and respecting the knowledge that each person has is essential for building that effective partnership and creating an easier space for families to, take on more leadership and engagement activities. Again, this sharing of two-way communication is really important, because we want to share information. We want to be able to trust and understand each other, have a sense of connectedness. We want to have this two-way communication because it is built on mutual respect and trust. And listening with intent, it gives everyone a chance to reflect on their own thoughts and understanding, and then just take the perspective of other people. And then you get to know, people a little bit more deeply. Sharing, power and decision-making is really important. And so when families are stepping into this space, they have to ask themselves, what does shared power and decision-making, what does it mean to me, right? Because it might mean something very different from early childhood professionals. And so shared power and decision-making, that could look like, sitting on an advisory board, that makes policies and personal decisions for the school or for the program. And so there are different ways of enacting shared power, but the main goal is that families are involved and they have feedback and input to make decisions about the programs or school. And so again, this sharing of decision and power, sharing power and decision-making, it requires a two-way communication. It relies on the expertise of both the families and the educator. It's clarity about who is responsible for what, right? And then there's a mutual desire just to provide the best care and education for children. And so now I know we have maybe about like 30 more minutes left, but we are going to switch gears now. So what I did in the first part is kind of, talk about some of the foundational things to help create the space for parents and caregivers and families to engage more effectively in advocacy roles and leadership roles, right? But now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about this appreciative inquiry approach, which can lend itself very well to, those 5 family care principles and those relationship-based competencies, because this appreciative inquiry approach is strength-based, right? It's like looking at, well, what are we doing well as a committee? What are we doing well as a council? What are we doing well, as a program or a community, right? And so it builds upon that. So what we're going to do now is take a look at a video. Let me share my sound so you all can hear it. Okay.
Appreciative inquiry is a philosophy and a process for harnessing the strengths and experiences of everyone in the system in order to build a desired future. It's particularly effective at injecting energy and optimism when the need for change has been identified. Recognizing that all of us are smarter than one of us and that people that help create change are more likely to own the change, AI is an evolving approach to transformation. It takes the best experiences of everyone and applies them to achieve end results. It focuses the mind on key questions such as, where do we want to go? And how will we get there? Through this approach, we avoid getting bogged down by obstacles and instead work together towards a common goal. At Aspire to Be, we believe that success is built upon the process of learning from past experience. Only when you have learned how to do it well can you truly determine how it can be done better or more efficiently. Appreciative inquiry provides a positive, practical and contextualized approach, allowing organizations to analyze their working environment by using a simple and focused outcome-based methodology. The power of this strength-based practice is that it can be applied to any aspect of work and can be used in anything from team meetings right up to large-scale cultural change programs. It's critically important for an organization to develop people capability and capacity to foster and stimulate growth. For appreciative inquiry to be successful and to instigate meaningful change, there are 6 key phases, each informing the next. AI is ideal for establishing vision and big picture thinking, even with people who have never met before. Even a large group will understand in a very short time that they share a lot of common ground. This phase is define, and is crucial as it outlines the programme's core purpose and objectives. Next, we bring people together to identify what has already worked well and the factors that contributed to the success. This phase is Discover, and it allows contributors to identify achievements and ways of working that will be valuable moving forward. Information from the Discover phase is then used as a platform to speculate on possible or desired futures. Key themes are transferred into statements of strategic and social intent. In the Dream phase, the value lies in the connections people see, relating to where they want to go and what they want to take with them. Participants then co-construct a new reality based on the Dream phase, applying direction, principles, and a strategic framework. Questions asked in this, the Design phase, relate to what would be ideal, how we make it work, and what conceptual behaviour or operational changes we would need to facilitate. The achievements made through the process are affirmed by tracking the journey on the programme with the team. The Deliver phase identifies how change will be delivered, embedded, and how it will spark cultural transformation within the organisation, capitalising on proactive observation to continually inform the process. Stakeholder engagement and a two-way communication is critical to successful programme delivery. In the Develop phase, assessing against the original objectives, along with target changes that may occur along the way, we identify and evaluate outcomes to map opportunities for progression, whilst consolidating the foundation upon which transformational change takes place. So why do we use AI? Simply because this methodology provides the vehicle for organisational growth by establishing an ongoing maturity model which sees culture at the very centre of performance improvement.
All right, so I like to show that video just because I think it does a really good job, provides like a high-level overview of Appreciative Inquiry Framework, and it really talks about the ways in which it is strength-based and also how it focuses on transformational change and how culture is important to that, right? Because when we think about culture, we're not just thinking about like race or ethnicity or anything like that, but we're also thinking about the culture of the committee that we are a part of, or, the parent council, that may be in place and things of that nature, the culture of the school or the program. And so we're going to go into each of those 5 Ds of the Appreciative Inquiry Model and just help you all think about some guiding questions, right? So when you're thinking about the define, part of it, we're defining the topic of inquiry, right? So if we're thinking about the inequities that are embedded within the educational system, this is really looking at what do we want to focus on? What do we need or what do we want to focus on as a system, as an organization, as a committee, as a council? What is it that we want more of? And sometimes we have to use definitions to help us clarify those areas of work that we want to consider. And the definitions provide, purpose and content and helps us understand what it is that needs to be achieved. And so when you're thinking about defining the topic of inquiry, a guiding question is what particular topic area in early childhood do we want to focus on together? Okay, and so then the next one is discover. This is kind of the fun part of the model. This is like appreciating the best of what is, right? It's kind of like that question, if money wasn't an object, what would you do? Or, if you could have, anything your way, what would that be, right? And so when you're thinking about this discover phase and trying to appreciate the best of what is, this is where you really dive into the strength, right? The best practices, the sources of excellence. And because some guiding questions could be, what do we do well as a committee, right? Or as an organization, or as a school or program, or, a parent or family council. And how do we know we do those things well? Like what tells us that we're doing those things well? What are the root causes of the successes that we have as a committee or organization or council? And what kind of environments contributes to that success, right? So when you're thinking about that question, it's like, well, what kind of relationships do you have in place that influence the outcome? What kind of communication do you have in place that affect the results? How can you identify those strengths? And what strengths from the experience could you develop further to ensure that you have continued positive outcomes? The next phase is the dream phase. It's also, a very, like fun and creative phase, because you're thinking about like the ideal vision for what you want as a committee, and how you can promote equity within the early childhood system. You want to be able to identify equity-related efforts that are already happening, like across the state or within different types of early childhood communications or committees or things that are happening within the community. And then you want to be able to reflect on opportunities, right? What are some resources that are in place, or what are some supports that are already in place that can assist, to help promote equity related work in early childhood. And then you want to be able to identify any threats or barriers. And when you identify those threats and barriers, you're also thinking about how can I turn those, or how can we turn those barriers or threats into opportunities for growth and improvement. Also in the dream phase, you're asking the question, what could be? So again, thinking about that $1 million question, you can imagine that you are exactly where you want to be as a committee or advisory group or council, like let's just say in the next 3 years, right? And then you ask yourself, what are the 3 biggest things that we have accomplished to get there? What are some ways the committee or advisory group has brought that to life? What good things is the committee known for in the community or in the field of early childhood? And what makes this committee best? So again, you can see how this model is really intentional about using a strength-based perspective, right? And then you get to the design phase. So you've already defined the topic, you've discovered the best of what you all do, and you've been dreaming, right? Like if we had this system the way we wanted it to look, this is what it will look like, right? And you take all of those 3 things that you've just done with define, discover, and dream, and then you turn that into the design. And the design is determining what could be. And then these are some guiding questions to help you through this process. How can you build on the strengths as a committee or a council or organization or school or program? What changes would you like to see the most in your committee to support systems change within early childhood? And maybe that is you want to see more parent advocacy and leadership. What do you imagine your role might be in making that happen? And what would you have in place to support the dream for the committee's future to support equity-related work and systems changing in early childhood? And then what are the 3 most compelling? 3 is just an arbitrary number, but you can pick, 2 or 5 or whatever. But what are the 3 most compelling opportunities for building your capacity to create systems change, which promise extraordinary results, right? What must you and your committee do to realize those results? So again, this model is very strength-based, and it focuses on the things that you are doing well. Again, how do you know you're doing those things well? What resources do you have in place with supports? How are you turning any barriers into opportunities for growth? You're looking at, the future and how you want to shape that, what your role will be in shaping that. So again, I think this model is very useful when thinking about, creating more equitable systems particularly within early childhood. And then you move to this destiny phase, right? And so here you want to bring people together. You want to bring systems leaders together, but you also want to bring, parents and families together, other people that are deeply involved in early childhood educations and other members of, advocacy teams that may be, in the community, again, that's doing equity related work. You want to help construct short, mid, and long-term goals using the SMART framework. And so, the SMART framework is when your goals are measurable, they're specific, and they're attainable, they're realistic, and then there's a time period attached to those. And then you want to continue to identify resources and support. Like that work is always, ongoing. It's not a check the box thing like, oh, we identified this resource and we have this support. You want to continue to identify those resources and supports that are needed to help achieve the goals. And also within the deliver stage, you're also, working a little bit in that destiny stage too, to create what will be. And this is more like the implementation stage. And so in this phase, the committee, they're putting the strategies that they went through in those other four, with the 4 Ds, with the define, the discover, the dream, and the design. They're putting all of that into action with this deliver phase. And so they're putting these strategies into action, but they are also revising and tweaking as necessary. And so some guiding questions you can think about, is how would you design the committee to make your most notable aspirations a dream or systems change in early childhood come true? What decisions is the committee prepared to make as a group? What are the committee's strategic performance indicators? And how do you know that you've made the transition successfully, right? Again, so this part of evaluating what you are doing and revisiting what you are doing. And how can the committee communicate these intentions, right? And who do you need to communicate them to? What are the key achievements, the initiatives, the products and services, the relationships? And who do you communicate that, those things to? And, are you prepared to be measured on those things? And if you are measured, who are you measured by and when? So again, you can see how not only is this model very strength-based, but it also embeds, the measurement and the evaluation piece of it to tweak what you're doing if necessary. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, yes, Amy, I will share the slide deck I guess I can share it with the conference coordinator, Michael, and then you all can have it. I guess he can send it out. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit. I know we don't have that much time. We have like 8 minutes. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about power, right? So we're going to talk about, I think like 3 or 4 types of power. We're going to talk about individual power, right? We all have power. I mean, sometimes we don't realize the power that we have. Sometimes we have to, there's a sense of empowerment that, that we may seek from other people. But the reality is we all have power. And so when we're thinking about, our power, we have to hold ourselves accountable, right? We're thinking about the things that we have achieved that helps us feel confident and, that helps build our self-efficacy. We reflect on where we've been and what we've done, and that also makes us feel empowered, when we, have accomplished something. And then also there's power in asking for help, so we can't be afraid to do that. Then there's social power, right? This is when we have the ability, when we believe that we can make a difference, when we can use our voice to make a difference, whether it's in the school or the program, in the community or the organization. And then sometimes we see others, that are speaking out that may be empowering us as well. Like, wow, we can do that too, right? The other type of power is like educational power, right? We know, we've all heard the saying that knowledge is power. The image on the slide even says that, right? Knowledge is power. When we become more knowledgeable about particular issues and topics, we know how to advocate better. We know how to step into leadership positions greater. We can understand what the barriers are. We are able to identify what the root causes, of the problem is, and then we can better advocate for that. And so let's go back to individual power. So here is when we have the ability to influence people and events. We're using our voices, right? We know that this comes from individual characteristics, right? So we all have, resilience and perseverance and determination, right? We all have different experiences that makes us empowered people. Someone with a strong personal power, again, it helps them focus on their self-efficacy, their confidence, and the ability to cooperate with others. And this is what we can use, right, when we want to advocate and lead to promote equity within early childhood. And so there's a couple of principles that I want to go over really quickly when we're talking about power. So the first principle is that we have to understand, respect, and generate power. Well, what does that look like, and how do we do that, right? Well, we have to recognize, again, that we all have power and that we have the power to create the change that we want to see. We have to be bold in understanding our rights and our responsibilities. And then we have to be, righteous in using our voice and speaking that, right? And we speak from our hearts and our minds and our bodies. All of those things are very powerful. And we use power, intentionally, deliberately, in service of each and all of us in the early childhood system. So not just parents and caregivers, but teachers, administrators, and most of all, children. Okay. And then the second principle is just knowing ourselves, right? Like knowing what our capacity is, knowing what we can step into, again, going back to that individual power and, our self-efficacy. We have to know our strengths, right? We have to know what we can do well, how we can do that well. We also have to know what weaknesses that we have. And then how can we, again, turn those weaknesses into opportunities for growth, right? We have to see and claim our power, our wisdom, our bravery, our intuitive and our emotional and our intellectual gifts, because we all have them. They may look different, but we all have them. We also have to be in a space of vulnerability, right? Because when we are vulnerable, we learn more. We understand more, we can dive deeper. So we have to be able to be open-minded. We have to be able to listen, learn, and act, especially to communities that have been marginalized or people that have been, excluded from this work intentionally. And so I am doing real good on time, have 4 minutes left. So I want you to share with me in the chat, what is one takeaway from today's session that you can apply or integrate into your work or effort as a parent or a caregiver or even an educator to advocate and support young children? And I will stop sharing my screen.
Dr. Mead, the text said that we've been extended to 11:50.
Oh, well, that's it. Unless people have questions that they want to share with me, that does conclude my PowerPoint, because I knew we only had like 45 or 50 minutes. But yeah, if you all want to share what is like one takeaway that you learned, or if you have questions, this is the time.
Margot's hand is raised.
Hey, Margot.
Hello, Dr. Mead. I have a quick question. I was recently doing some work or whatnot and was looking at the difference between SMART goals and PAT goals. And I know I can't remember if it was in the design area or whatnot, but can you speak a little bit to the difference between SMART and PAT goals, or when it's appropriate to use the difference? And this might not be the right setting for this question, but I was just thinking of that.
Well, I have to be honest with you, Margot. So I don't know what PAT goals are. And so now when I get off this this Zoom meeting, I'm going to look that up. So I've never heard of PAT goals before. I've heard of SMART goals and SMARTY goals, but I've never heard of PAT goals before. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. But if someone asks me again, Margot, I will. Because I'm going to look it up. Any other thoughts or questions, comments? Again, if you just want to share, like, what is one takeaway that you feel like you can apply?
Ms. Horn said finding the root cause of the problem and then implementing a plan.
Yes, thank you. Something that resonated with me is to claim your strengths. I have so many parents who are so invested in their children and have valuable strengths to better their child's education, and they just can't seem to claim and build. Yes, Shannon. Yeah, so helping families see that, they are the experts, not just of their families, but they are entrenched in the systems too, right? And so how do we help families see that they are just as much as an expert as, as the early childhood professionals? And again, I think one way to do that is really, really creating space for shared power and shared decision making. Like, we want input from families, right? We want to be able to have them, be involved, and be involved in an intentional and authentic way, right? Not like a check the box kind of thing, So it's not an afterthought. It should be how we approach the work. Natasha says, I can revisit an experience with faculty to suggest a different approach to staff, decompressing, de-escalating before communication and reaching out to parents. Yes. And Amy says she loves the dream phase. Many people think we need to just work with what we have. Sometimes, yes, Amy, sometimes you have to see where you want to go in order to get there. Absolutely, right? Like I said, the dream phase is so much fun, right? It's like that question, like if money wasn't an issue, what would you do, right? We can all answer that question, probably like in about 5 minutes or less, right? So how do we take that same thought process and apply it to creating, more equitable systems in early childhood? Because we know that there's work to be done. And I think for many of us that are early childhood professionals, regardless of the capacity that we're in, we know that there's inequities within the early childhood system, but COVID kind of just like exacerbated that for us, right? And so we know that there's work to be done, Connie says, hi, Connie. I remember Connie when I used to work at Smart Start. Connie says, I plan to encourage a staff person to listen to your presentation to assist her with developing her advocacy presentation for our parent group. It's good to see you, Connie. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions or comments or things that you would like to share, I am going to put my email in the chat because I'm always open to have deeper conversations with. Did I just send that to you, Donna? I think I just sent that.
You sent it directly to me, but
I sent it to you, Donna. That's okay.
It's okay. You want me to copy it and put it in the group?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Were you going to read?
Yes, Delissa, she said, what is the best approach when the school is not receptive and more argumentative when you express concerns?
Yeah, I think, so that's a really good question. I think going back to what is the mission? What are the values of the school, right? And asking really hard questions like, are we living into those values? Are we being good stewards of carrying out the mission? And if the answer, Delisa, to that is no, then I think another question could be, well, how could we do that better, right? And the other thing is that, when I do this work, I do a lot of work, and Margot knows this, I do a lot of work around like racial equity in early childhood and do a lot of professional development and things like that. The reality is that some people are just not coming on board, right? And that's okay. Because what we need to concentrate our efforts on is building the coalition of people that are interested in coming on board. Those people that are curious, those people that want to do the work, that's what we need to concentrate our efforts. We can't concentrate our efforts on those that are not coming on board. So we can share information, right? Like, because I'm just a messenger. That's all I am. So we can share information, we can share what we know, and we hope that people come along because we have, and I'm not at all trying to get political here, but I live in Georgia. And so I have the governor in the neighboring state south of me, and that's all I'm gonna say, that are doing some very dangerous things to dismantle our democracy. And so we have to be in a position where we can build the coalition, because that's what we need in order to see the changes that we want to have. And I don't know if that answered your question, Delisa, but it's like you're a messenger, right? And then you have to think about your individual power and how you can make change, because some folks are not coming on board. And again, we don't want them to, because they're going to sabotage the work that we're trying to do. All right, any other thoughts comments. Thank you all for joining. I was a little worried at first. I was like, it's 2 people here. So thank you all for joining and spending your Saturday morning with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.